A man screams as soldiers beat him with rifle butts. Blood streams down his face. His hands are tied behind his back with wire that cuts into his wrists. This is January 17th, 1961. The man being tortured is the democratically elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 6 hours, he'll be dead. Shot 3 times. His body cut into pieces. Dissolved in acid. This is the story of how the CIA, Belgian mining companies, and African traders conspired to destroy a man who dared to dream of true independence for his people. It's the story of a dream of a united Africa free from its colonial masters. This man is Patrice Lumumba, and his 1961 assassination still haunts the Congo to this day. His crime? He told white people they didn't own Congo anymore. What you're about to discover will change how you see every conflict, every coup, and every coincidental death of a leader who dared to challenge the system. Because this wasn't just an assassination. This was the blueprint for how Western powers would control Africa for the next 60 years. The same blueprint used from Libya to Iraq, from Guatemala to Iran. The same players, the same methods, the same devastating results. On July-Sept, 1925, in the small village of Onalua in the Belgian Congo, a child was born who would one day challenge the world order. His parents named him Patrice Lumumba. The Congo that Lumumba was born into was hell on earth. Belgian King Leopold II had turned a land 80 times larger than Belgium itself into his personal slave plantation. Congolese workers had their hands chopped off if they didn't meet rubber quotas. Children were held hostage to force their parents to work. 10 million Congolese died under Belgian rule. 10 million people. Copper, diamonds, uranium, rubber, you name it. The Congo had it all. And the Belgians were taking it all. Young Lumumba was different. While other children played, he studied. While others accepted their fate, he questioned everything. While others accepted their chains, he read books about revolution. The missionary schools taught him to read, but they couldn't control what he chose to read. By his 20s, Lumumba had worked as a postal clerk, a beer salesman, anything to survive. He taught himself to debate and write so well that he earned the respect of Belgian administrators. In 1958, everything changed. Lumumba traveled to Accra, Ghana, for the All-African People's Conference. There, he met Kwame Nkrumah, the man who had kicked the British out of Ghana. For the first time, Lumumba saw what was possible. He saw that white rule was not destiny. It was just temporary. He returned to Congo with fire in his eyes and founded the Mouvement National Congolais. His message was simple but revolutionary. Independence now, not tomorrow now. The Belgians laughed. They had ruled Congo for 75 years. What could one postal clerk do? They were about to find out. January 4th, 1959. Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, erupts. What began as a political rally became a citywide uprising as thousands of Congolese protesters demanded immediate independence. The Belgian colonial police opened fire, killing 49 protesters and wounding hundreds more. But something had shifted. Fear was gone, and the psychology of colonial submission was broken. Leading the charge was Patrice Lumumba, his voice carrying over the crowds like thunder. "We will no longer be your slaves. We will be free." The Belgians were terrified. They arrested Lumumba in October 1959 for inciting rebellion. But here's the thing. Arresting the leader of a revolution doesn't stop it. It only creates a martyr. By January 1960, riots spread across multiple cities, and the colony had become largely ungovernable. Facing mounting pressure both domestically and internationally, Belgium had no choice but to negotiate. They released Lumumba from prison and flew him to Brussels for independence talks. Imagine the irony. The man they'd chained was now sitting across them at the negotiating table, demanding his country's freedom. Belgium's plan was to give Congo independence on paper but keep control of the army, economy, and the mines. They'd install puppet leaders who would do their bidding. a strategy they had observed other European powers attempt across Africa. The negotiations culminated in an agreement for Congo's independence on June 30th, 1960. Belgium retained significant influence over the military, economic institutions, and mineral extraction rights. Fast forward to June 30th, 1960. Independence Day. King Baudouin of Belgium stood before the world and delivered a speech that would have made his colonial ancestors proud. He praised the genius of his ancestor, the butcher King Leopold II, talked about Belgium's role in the Congo as a civilizing mission, and suggested that Congo should be grateful for 75 years of exploitation. He warned the new nation against any hasty reforms. It was a lecture, a final jab of colonial superiority.
Constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II, que le Congo accède ce 30 juin 1960 en plein accord et amitié avec la Belgique à l'indépendance et à la souveraineté internationale.
Then Patrice Lumumba, the new prime minister, stepped up to the podium. His speech wasn't on the official program, and what he said next would send shockwaves through the halls of power in Brussels and Washington. He didn't thank the Belgians. Instead, he spoke directly to the Congolese people and reminded them of the truth.
Combattants de l'indépendance, aujourd'hui victorieux, je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. À vous tous, mes amis, qui avez lutté sans relâche à nos côtés, je vous demande de faire à leur tour face connaître à leurs fils et à leurs petits-fils l'histoire glorieuse de notre lutte pour la liberté. Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir au matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les vous honorables étaient réservés aux seuls blancs.
We have known the ironies, the insults, the blows which we have had to endure morning, noon, and night because we were Negroes. We have known that our lands were despoiled in the name of supposedly legal texts which recognized only the right of might. We have known that the law was never the same depending on whether it concerned a white or a Negro. We are no longer your monkeys. Then he looked to the future. He declared that from now on, the Congo's history would be written by the Congolese. We shall make the Congo the pride of Africa, he roared. For the Congolese there, it was an electrifying moment. Finally, a leader was speaking their truth on the world stage. But for the Belgian king and Western diplomats in the room, it was an insult they'd never forgive. Lumumba had broken the unwritten rule. He refused to be a grateful, obedient puppet. In that one fiery speech, Lumumba defined himself as a nationalist who wouldn't compromise. He had drawn a line in the sand, and in doing so, he had just signed his own death warrant. Lumumba became prime minister. Joseph Kasavubu became president. Congo was finally free, for exactly 5 days. On July 5th, 1960, the Congolese National Army mutinied. Soldiers who had been commanded by white Belgian officers for decades suddenly turned their guns on their former masters. The violence spread rapidly, and the young nation plunged into chaos. The Belgians had a choice: respect Congo's independence or invade. They chose invasion. Within hours, Belgian paratroopers were dropping from the sky, claiming they were protecting Belgian citizens. But everyone knew the truth. They were protecting Belgian economic interests and profits. During this period, a conspiracy began to wrap itself around Lumumba, a web with threads stretching from Brussels and Washington right back to the Congo. First, you had Belgium, who had given up political control, but had zero intention of letting go of its economic grip, especially over the breakaway province of Katanga. Think of Katanga as Congo's treasure chest. This single province housed more mineral wealth than most countries. Katanga was and still is home to the richest copper mines in Africa, overflowing with diamonds, cobalt, and the uranium used in the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. For 75 years, one Belgian company, Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, had been extracting billions from these mines while paying Congolese workers pennies. Katanga wasn't just a province to Belgium. It was their golden goose. Lose Katanga, lose everything, and they weren't about to hand it over to a nationalist prime minister. So, they engineered a secession. The man behind it? Moise Tshombe, who was being paid by Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, the Belgian mining conglomerate that's been sucking Congo dry for decades. With Belgian money, Belgian advisors, and Belgian military officers, Moise Tshombe declared Katanga an independent state. It was a direct attack on Lumumba's dream of a united Congo, meant to cripple the new government before it could even get on its feet. Then, there was the American fear. In Washington, the Cold War was at its peak. Everything was seen as capitalism versus communism. US intelligence knew Lumumba was a nationalist seeking neutrality, not a communist. But President Eisenhower and his CIA director, Allen Dulles, saw a potential African Fidel Castro. When Lumumba, desperate for help to end the Belgian-backed secession, was turned down by the West, he made a fateful call. He asked the Soviet Union for logistical help. For Washington, that was all the proof they needed. Dulles called Lumumba a grave danger that had to be neutralized. In August 1960, President Eisenhower gave a verbal order to the CIA: eliminate Patrice Lumumba. The order was so sensitive it was passed through back channels. The CIA's top poison expert, the infamous Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the same guy behind the MK-Ultra mind control experiments, was sent to the Congo. He brought a vial of lethal toxin with a plan to poison Lumumba's food or, in one of the weirdest plots in spy history, his toothpaste. The plan failed only because they couldn't get close enough to his food, but that alone was proof of how far the US was willing to go in silencing a man who stood for the best interests of his people. The UN's role in this whole mess is still a source of deep shame. Lumumba had invited the UN to help kick out the Belgians and end the Katanga secession. But the UN forces, tied down by their mandate and the politics of their powerful members, just stood by. They didn't stop the separatists in Katanga, and more importantly, they didn't protect the very prime minister who asked them to be there. The web was complete. But Lumumba wasn't finished yet. To make it all happen, the West needed local partners. They found them in men like President Joseph Kasavubu and, more importantly, the ambitious Army Chief of Staff, Joseph Désiré Mobutu, who had been secretly receiving CIA payments. On September 14, 1960, Mobutu struck. In a carefully orchestrated coup, he announced he was neutralizing both Lumumba and President Kasavubu. Congo's democracy was dead. It lasted exactly 10 weeks and 4 days, putting Lumumba under house arrest, guarded by his own soldiers. But Lumumba was a man of action, not patience. On November 27, 1960, he made his escape. His plan was simple: reach Stanleyville, where his supporters controlled the government, and launch a counterattack. If he could get there, he could rally the people and reclaim his country. It was a journey of hundreds of miles through a country now crawling with Mobutu's soldiers. For a few days, it looked like he might actually make it. Cheering crowds greeted him in villages along the way, showing how popular he still was. But Mobutu's forces, with help from Western intelligence, were closing in. Near the Sankuru River, Lumumba's convoy was cut off. To avoid a shootout that would endanger his family, he gave himself up. What followed was designed to humiliate and break his spirit. The pictures of his capture are some of the most humiliating ever taken of a world leader. He was beaten with rifle butts, paraded in front of cameras, hands tied, glasses crooked, as soldiers shoved and mocked him. His bloodied images were broadcast worldwide, generating international outrage and sympathy. It was a calculated show, designed to destroy his heroic image. He was flown back to Leopoldville and thrown into a military barracks, where he was repeatedly beaten and tortured. The Soviet Union threatened intervention. African nations demanded his release. For a moment, it seemed like the world might save him. The conspirators, Mobutu, his Western backers, and the Katangan separatists, decided he had to be permanently silenced. They made a plan to fly him to the one place his death was guaranteed, the breakaway province of Katanga, straight into the hands of his worst enemy, Moise Tshombe, and his Belgian advisors. As the plane took off, Lumumba must have known he was flying to his death. The only question was, would anyone try to stop it? The answer was no. On January 17, 1961, they loaded him onto a plane with two of his closest allies, Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito. They were beaten so savagely throughout the flight that by the time they landed in Elizabethville, Katanga's capital, they were barely conscious. Moise Tshombe, the Katangan leader, had already given the order. There would be no trial, no prison, no exile, just execution. They drove Lumumba and his companions to a remote house outside the city. What transpired in that house remained a secret for 4 decades, until Belgian officer Gerard Soete provided a detailed confession in 2001. The guilt had been eating him up. According to Soete's account, Lumumba and his companions were tortured throughout the night, demanding that he renounce his political beliefs and admit his errors. He refused every demand. With Katangan leaders and Belgian officers watching, the 3 men were dragged one by one to a large tree and executed by a firing squad. The 35-year-old who had dared to dream of African freedom died in a pool of his own blood, far from home, surrounded by his enemies. But his killers weren't finished. They couldn't risk his grave becoming a pilgrimage site. So they did something unspeakable. 2 Belgian police officers, Gerard Soete and his brother, were ordered to get rid of the bodies. In a horrifying 2-day ordeal, they dug up the corpses, chopped them up with a hacksaw, and dissolved them in sulfuric acid. It was a ghastly attempt to wipe Patrice Lumumba off the face of the earth. But Gerard Soete kept a souvenir. He pried a gold-capped tooth from Lumumba's jaw, a final sickening trophy of the crime. On February 13, 1961, the world learned of Patrice Lumumba's death. The official story was a lie. The Katangan authorities claimed Lumumba had escaped and been killed by angry villagers. Nobody believed it. From Moscow to Cairo, from Accra to Algiers, millions took to the streets in protest. The Soviet Union established Patrice Lumumba People's Friendship University after him. Streets and schools across Africa were renamed in his honor. His face appeared on stamps and murals from Angola to Zimbabwe. But in Congo, his death unleashed a nightmare that lasts to this day. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba was a political reset. For the West, the Lumumba problem was solved. The threat of a fiercely independent nationalist leader was gone. In his place, they got their guy, the man they had backed and funded, Joseph Désiré Mobutu. Mobutu tightened his grip on power. In 1965, he staged a second coup, this time getting rid of the civilian government for good, and declared himself absolute ruler, launching one of Africa's longest and most destructive dictatorships. For the next 32 years, Mobutu ruled the Congo as his personal piggy bank. He renamed the country Zaire, and himself, Mobutu Sese Seko, which basically means the all-powerful warrior who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. He was a loyal ally to the West during the Cold War. In return for his allegiance in keeping the Congo's vast mineral resources flowing to Western markets and preventing Soviet influence in Central Africa, he was propped up with billions of dollars in foreign aid from the US and France. But that money didn't build schools or hospitals for the Congolese people. It went straight into Swiss bank accounts. It paid for jungle palaces and Paris shopping sprees. Mobutu perfected kleptocracy, a government of thieves. While becoming one of the richest men in the world, Congo, one of the world's most resource-rich countries, became one of the poorest, with millions dying from conflict, disease, and malnutrition. This is what Lumumba died trying to prevent. Patrice Lumumba was Prime Minister of Congo for exactly 81 days. In that brief moment, he dared to imagine an Africa that belonged to Africans, an Africa where the wealth stayed in African hands, an Africa united in dignity and independence. For that dream, he paid with his life. Today, when young Africans demand economic freedom, that's Lumumba's voice. When they question foreign interference, that's Lumumba's spirit. When they refuse to accept that Africa must always be poor while others profit from its riches, that's Lumumba's dream. In Congo, where children mine cobalt for smartphones they'll never own. In Ghana, where citizens demand greater control over their gold resources. In South Africa, where land redistribution remains contentious. Across Africa, wherever people refuse to be exploited, Lumumba's spirit whispers, "Fight back." This story is a chilling reminder that when foreign powers conspire to kill a nation's sovereignty, the nightmare that follows can last for generations. The question is, when will his dream finally defeat this nightmare? The tooth has come home. But the fight for the soul of Africa, that battle is far from over.